Hi everyone, welcome back to Word of Mouth, the show where we taste and talk. Today I'm going to be making some dinner rolls to go with a meal that I'm making for my wife's birthday. So today on Word of Mouth we'll be talking to Pastor Pete Odera, or Dr. Pete Odera, or simply Pete, depending on where you know him from. But I can tell you, if you are in Christian ministry in Kenya, you know this legendary gentleman. And yeah, it's going to be a treat. Welcome to Word of Mouth. Let's get on with making dinner rolls. I'm curious, I know a bit about your history, but how long have you been involved in ministry or in music ministry?
It'll be 30 years. It's 30 years actually last month.
From your background and your family's background, you could have ended up anywhere. You could have followed the civil service and politics and secular music. How did you end up in ministry? Was there a Damascus moment?
That's interesting. So let me just give a little bit of background. You're absolutely right. Because my father, as you rightly put it, was involved in opposition politics. And so our family was political. Of course, my brother ran for office, Pastor Koi. He ran for office in Westland's constituency. I think where politics is concerned, I always prefer to be the kitchen cabinet, always in the background, strategizing. I think I care too much to be involved in the hard knocks of the politics. You have to have I suppose you have to have a sort of tough skin. Almost a hard heart in African politics. But I became a believer in primary school. Mrs. Roberts was a Scottish missionary. And so I was a kid in primary school. It was 1979, 78 or 79, 79 when she'd come every Thursday lunchtime and do what they called a Bible club and then invite kids to know Jesus. And that was my first experience with Jesus. I distinctly remember that year we got a new music teacher. And she was just mean to me. She took no nonsense, and you're 9. You're 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old, and you have a gift, but you don't even understand what it is. And so she did this thing where they audition. And I remember she asking me a question, almost crushing. She said, "What's wrong with your voice? Can't you sing?" And I was like, I'm a kid, what do I know? You tell me what's wrong with my voice, and of course, this is Africa, you don't respond to your teacher, and I felt crushed. But you imagine the same year that these two ladies, the Kenyan lady who'd studied in America, came back and was just pushing her way around, this Scottish lady who'd come to Africa and just gave this little boy a chance. The same year, these 3 ladies, there's a third lady, she was called Mrs. Rogers. She was in charge of the children's church, the Sunday school program at Nairobi Baptist Church. And she gave me a chance that year to sing a solo in the Christmas presentation. The first time I ever sang in public. So those three things in the same year were a landmark for me. So if you're talking about Damascus, that was it. That was a long Damascus year for me. But then I grew up as a believer. But here's the thing that you need to understand is that because we grew up my family was involved in politics. My uncle, my mom's cousin, had a band, Black Savage, and they were the Uncle Gordon Ominde was the original writer of Koth Biro, this song that now Ayub Ogada took and now Kanye West has sampled. So my uncle had this band, also Black Savage, and they played a mixture of folk music and Santana. So that was exposure. And then I lived right next to a DJ.
Wow.
So, yeah. So after growing up, I had a gift. In fact, my training was in graphic arts. So when I left college, I was going into a career in design. And I remember one day I was studying French at the time at Alliance Française, and I was trying to get this thing because I wanted to go to France and become a designer because France was the center of design. And I really just, one night, one of my mentors was trying to get me into an advertising agency. And it was really interesting. I think one night I was praying and I just said, the question is, which of my gifts will impact greater? My music. At the time I was playing sports. I was playing rugby for Kenya Harlequins. So my music, my sports, or my art, or the politics. And I really didn't think about politics that much at the time. But I realized that the music was the gift because at that time I could see, I had the mind enough to see, and God gave me the insight to know that the next generation was going to be impacted through media and entertainment. And that was really basically the decision. And after that, the rest is history.
I've talked to a number of people, some who have been in church and they've left, musicians who have been in church and they've left. And there's always this one thing they keep pointing to, and that is church is not able to retain best musicians. So you find all the best musicians are secular, but they started in church. And somehow they've been either hurt or they've not found meaning in their work in the church. How do you speak to that?
I think our group, in interacting with groups like Five Alive, in mentoring Five Alive, and I almost became one of the Five Alive, but there were already five. I might have become the sixth, and so it would have been Kenya's take six.
Okay, but we just want to encourage you guys, that the Bible does say no matter what you're going through, surely goodness and mercy follow me.
But here's the thing I want to say. The group heart for us was two guys, two girls, Ted Josiah, Sally Oyugi, who we buried last year. I did her funeral. I was so sad. And Esther Morakinyo and myself were heart. It was an amazing group, a quartet of phenomenal singers and musicians. I think the temptation is always to think that there's an opportunity. But when we were growing up, please remember this was the late 80s and mid 90s. The mid 90s was not the best time for musicians of any type in Kenya. So I never got involved in music because I wanted to be a famous musician. It's just from the get-go. This is something none of us did. Not Ted, not Sally, not Esther. The reason we got involved in music, because music was the tool for ministry. The basic idea of many of the young people in the church at that time was Jesus is coming soon. what can we do to win our generation? That was the mentality. So for me, it was, this is a no-brainer. None of us went trained for it. I didn't have training in music, neither did Ted, Sally, or Esther. I feel that we exaggerate, the measure that we give to say this is a secular musician and this is a sacred musician, we don't apply to banking at all. Somebody can go and be a banker and we'll never have a problem with that. But that is as secular as they come, because we're right there with Mammon, So I think it's an over-exaggerated example sometimes. And people talk about, nobody ever says that about doctors, why would you give this unfair measure to musicians? And I think that that's just unfair. For that reason, I have people now in my church who are secular musicians. I mean, like seriously famous secular musicians. I never put pressure on them to come and join the worship team. I've never said to them, leave this secular rubbish. I say, look, there's a place for entertainment. My thing is to pastor them. My thing is to say to them, look, if you're called to be an entertainer, because that's a job in the same way that somebody can be called to be a banker, in the same way that somebody can be called to be a doctor, because a doctor is a calling, a banker is a calling. It's not just a job or a career that somebody pursues, in the same way that an artist is a calling. And so I encourage them, if you ever get the sense that God is calling you away and into a career in music, specifically in gospel music, then it's something you need to pray about and be willing to do it. In Swahili, we say kujitolea, and understand that it's ministry. It's something that you're giving your heart to. And so I think we need to, I think many people who are so-called gospel musicians should really just forget about it, really, quite frankly, and go and be entertainers and do that. And then just be a good Christian, and rather than try and lead people to Christ with no Christian witness. And I think that that's important, that the Christian witness in your heart is more important. Now, you can be a greater witness in a bank. You can be a great witness in a bank, a great witness in a hospital, a great witness in the entertainment zone. And I'm really encouraged by people who I've met, like Kirk Whalum, who, is music director of some of the greatest bands. He was a music director in Whitney Houston's band at the time when Whitney was Whitney. When that song was number one, I Will Always Love You, but has kept his witness. He plays with some of the best in the industry, but keeps the witness. And I think that that's the important thing. So I would advise some Christian musicians, and I know that I might get flack for this, but I believe some guys who are gospel musicians, they should just leave it. Listen, just go and be an entertainer in peace. And then some entertainers have a call. I don't know if you know Charlie Wilson from the Gap Band. If you watch a Charlie Wilson concert, you'll be confused in the middle because he goes right out and starts to preach. So for me, I think that that's an opportunity to preach to people who never may have gotten the opportunity. So I think that those are examples to me, because Africans, we tend to really segment and put this thing, but isn't the earth the Lord's and the fullness thereof? I know there's pastors who will say, oh, Pastor Pete, you can't encourage people to do that. I say, but you take the people in the bank's offering and you call it holy. What's up with that? So my view on that, as you can see, is a little bit radical. So that's what I'd have to say.
so many Christians complain just like everyone else about, what's going on. How can a Christian be the kitchen cabinet, as you said, in this day and age, and make a real impact in the one that we're seeing and change?
Yeah, I think we must. I feel there's a place for it, and here's the thing: when we look at the life of Jesus, Jesus had something to say. In fact, if anything, he had something to say about how politics affects society. And for me, if we look at it, what did Jesus say to the soldiers or tax collectors? And those were viewed as hated by the community. Tax collectors were those guys. But if you look at Jesus' general attitude, it was to minister to their spirits. But I think there's another side of it that I think we tend to forget. The whole idea, back to this question of the secular and the sacred. Who said that we shouldn't be in the mountain or the gate of politics and not influence the ideas there? In the absence of a Christian witness in Parliament, anything, any ideology, any crazy thing may be put out there and find its way into the law. So I think there's a place to then say we need to be watchmen, sort of like watchmen. I'm not saying Kenya needs to be a Christian nation in terms of having a theocracy as such, but I do say that there's a place for us to then question how does the law affect the poor? We'll think about this whole crisis with regard to health. Is there equity where health is concerned? And so I feel that for me, the important thing is that believers need to be at the forefront. I think that God calls us to stewardship. And if we can put the government on its toes with just that one thing of stewardship, wouldn't Africa be a much better place? So I feel that our role in politics isn't so much to garner the people's support on our side, but to stand for integrity, stand for stewardship. Those are things that we share in common, regardless of our religious persuasions. Stewardship, integrity. When we stop caring for the poor as believers, we lose our legitimacy. And I feel that the legitimacy of the church has been very much compromised in Kenya, but certainly in Africa, because we've forgotten the plight of the poor. We can rally people around common things that make us, we don't even have to change our message at all. All we have to say is that these are the stewardship. Can we be good stewards? Can we walk in integrity? Can we remember the poor? Those three messages, any politician can take that and make it his message and get into office with just those three things. I've always had an interest in radio. I think radio is such an amazing tool, over TV. And I think the internet is one of the best combinations of all the visual and audio side of this thing. I always believed in radio because you cannot take a TV into your bathroom. That was always the advantage of the radio. Radio is always mobile. But now you have these gadgets and you have all of those in this little thing. You have the radio, the TV, the everything, recording studio, what have you. And so I'm always waiting for an opportunity to put something out there. And my agenda is always almost always two things. Is one, to put the gospel music in a space where it's not been heard before. It's sort of like an apostolic mentality that I have. put gospel music in a place where it hasn't been heard before. And I think that for me was why I always endeavored to have the music on secular stations. And back then we didn't have any Christian stations at all, except I think it was Transworld Radio, which was doing shortwave. They were only doing a little shortwave station, with the only Christian station at that time. So that was one. But the other was always to say that I think Africa always has something to offer. And so we partnered with Mandate Records to set up this thing. And so there was an aperture there with Gospel on Demand Radio 1, based out of San Diego in California. And the Lord granted us an opportunity. So we've developed a program called Good Morning Africa. And the idea of the program is two things, is to create a program for those in the diaspora in England, but mainly in the United States, to hear the music from home in a way. So I'm not just talking about that. That's just one of the things. But the other side is to get the Americans who are on that end also to hear what we have to offer, and then get their music. And we've heard their music for the longest time. So 80% of my radio show is African content from Ghana, Liberia, Kenya, South Africa, wherever. And so, but also what it's done, because a lot of African countries are very inward looking, but the world is bigger than Nairobi. The world is bigger than Harare. The world is bigger than Kampala. To introduce Diana Hamilton from Ghana to a Kenyan audience, Joe Metal in Ghana to a Zimbabwean audience, Pastor G to an Ethiopian audience. That, to me, tells us the story of Africa, where we're this mix of languages and ideas. In Africa, it's 9 o'clock East African time. And you can tune in Sunday morning, and Dr. Pete Odera will be there for you with this wonderful show, Good Morning Africa. This is Word of Mouth with Pastor P and Prince. And I recommend the recipe for that bread that my daughters made.